In my first life, my stepsister wore my wedding dress to a hotel suite on the afternoon before my ceremony, met my fiancé there, and walked out of that suite pregnant with the child he later used to annul my marriage and steal my inheritance. I did not find out for 9 months. By then, I had been locked out of the family home, removed from my mother's will, and labeled publicly as the bitter, barren, jealous daughter who could not accept being outshone. I died 2 years later in a rental apartment with peeling wallpaper, still trying to convince one person, any person, that I had not made the whole thing up. In this life, I handed her the dress myself. I told her it would look better on her. I watched her smile the way a cat smiles at an unlocked birdcage, and then I went home and opened the drawer where I had already placed 6 receipts, and I waited for her to hand me the 7th. There are 7 of them. 7 documents, 7 objects, 7 small pieces of proof that my family spent my entire life teaching me to ignore. This time, I numbered them. This is what each one was and what each one cost them. My name is Chow Wen-shu. I was the eldest daughter of the Chow family, the only child of my late father, and by a second marriage that my mother made when I was 7, the older stepsister of a girl named Chow Mei-ning. The Chow family was not the richest family in the city, but we were old, which in our circles mattered more than money. My father had left me through a trust he drafted 2 months before he died, a controlling stake in the Chow Textile Heritage Company, and a private apartment building in the Old Quarter. He had left my mother the right to manage the trust until I turned 30. He had not left her or my stepfather or my stepsister any claim on the principal. That trust is the shape of every betrayal that followed. Everything they ever did to me was, in the end, a way of trying to reach around my dead father to the money he had tried to protect. I was 26 when I got engaged. My fiancé, Shu Han Zhang, was a kind-faced lawyer from a respectable but modest family, the kind of man my mother described to her friends as suitable. I believed he loved me. I believed he wanted to build a life with me. I believed this because I was, in my first life, a person who mistook being useful for being chosen. The wedding was scheduled for the 30th of September. I had spent 4 months on the dress. It was ivory silk, a hand embroidered with a pattern of pomegranate branches that my grandmother had sewn into her own wedding veil 60 years before. My seamstress, Madame Fay, had promised me that the final fitting would be the last one, and that no other woman's body would touch the dress before my wedding day. I believed her too. I believed a lot of people in my first life. On the afternoon of September 29th, the day before my wedding, my stepsister Mining came to my room and told me, crying, that she had been invited to an urgent meeting with a scholarship committee member and did not know what to wear. She was 22. She was in her final year at art school. The scholarship, she said, would save our family the cost of her graduate studies. She asked if she could borrow my second best dress, as a champagne-colored gown I had worn to 2 engagement dinners. I said yes. I went to the closet. I reached for the champagne dress. She stopped my hand. She said softly, almost shyly, "Wenshu, could I wear the ivory one? Just for the meeting. Just for an hour. It would mean so much. I want them to see I am serious." I hesitated. In my first life, I hesitated for exactly 11 seconds, and then I said yes, because I had been trained since the age of 7 to say yes to Mining whenever she made her voice that small. I took my wedding dress off its hanger. I helped her into it. I fastened the pearl buttons down the back. I kissed the top of her head. I told her to bring it back by 8 that evening. She did not bring it back by 8. She brought it back at 11, with a small rip near the hem, and a faint smell that was not her perfume, and an expression on her face that I recognized like later, too late, as the expression of a woman who had just taken something that was never going to be returned. The wedding happened the next day. My fiancé was there. He smiled for the photographs. He put the ring on my finger. He went home with me that night. 3 weeks later, at a family dinner, my stepsister quietly announced that she was pregnant. She said, with her eyes carefully lowered, that she did not wish to name the father because he was a married man and she did not want to destroy his family. My mother cried. My stepfather patted her hand. Shu Hanjiang, my husband of 3 weeks, stood up to get her a glass of water. I did not know for 9 months. 9 months of small cruelties, of sudden coldness, of my husband sleeping in his own study, of my mother's invitations to dinner arriving without my name on them. Mining gave birth at the end of June in a private hospital paid for by an anonymous benefactor. The baby was a boy. 6 weeks after his birth, Shu Hanjiang came to me with a manila envelope and said quietly that the child was his, that he had loved mining for years, that our marriage had been a mistake his family had pressured him into, and that he would be filing for annulment on the grounds that I had knowingly withheld information about my own fertility. The annulment grounds were a lie. I had never been tested. But my mother, when I called her, said that the family had already spoken to the lawyer, that the papers were drawn up, that the best thing I could do for everyone was sign. I signed. I had no evidence. And I had no witnesses. I had only my memory of a dress borrowed for a scholarship meeting, and a rip near the hem, and a smell that was not her perfume, and 9 months of coldness that could, every day, be explained away as my imagination. I had nothing to connect the pieces. They called me jealous. They called me unstable. They called me bitter. My mother, at a family meeting 3 months after the annulment, activated a morality clause in the trust that my stepfather had quietly inserted during a routine administrative update when I was 19. A clause I had never read. A clause that allowed the trustee to redirect the principal in the event of demonstrated public instability on the part of the beneficiary. She used it. She redirected the controlling stake to Mining's newborn son, held in trust, managed by her and my stepfather,
and with Mining as primary administrator. The apartment building was sold to cover family expenses. I kept a single account under my own name, with enough money to live on for 18 months if I was careful. I was not careful. I was too tired to be careful. I moved into a rented apartment in a neighborhood where no one knew the Chow name. I tried to get a job. Every interview ended when they looked up my family. I wrote letters to my mother. She did not reply. I wrote to Shu Hanjiang. He sent a lawyer's letter asking me to stop harassing his household. I tried once. At a family New Year's dinner I was not invited to but attended anyway, to show my mother a single photograph I had found of my stepsister wearing what looked like my wedding dress in a hotel lobby.
Taken by a society photographer who had happened to be in the building that afternoon. My mother looked at the photograph for 3 seconds. She said, "Wenshu, you are embarrassing yourself. This could be any dress. This could be any woman. You need to see someone." I died 19 months after the annulment. It was not dramatic. I developed a lingering cough in November, did not have the money to see a doctor, and the cough became pneumonia, and the pneumonia became something worse in February. The landlord found me on a Tuesday. My mother did not attend the funeral. She sent flowers. The card read, "Rest in peace, my troubled daughter. Now, the second life." I woke up on the morning of September 23rd, 6 days before my stepsister would come to my room asking to borrow a dress. I knew the date before I opened my eyes. I did not cry. I did not scream. I sat at my vanity and I thought about the photograph my mother had dismissed, and the dress my seamstress had promised me no other woman would touch, and the 9 months of coldness that could always be explained away, and I understood, with a clarity that felt like cold water, that I had lost the first life, not because my family was cruel, but because I had never once made them look at the whole picture at once. They had gotten away with every single thing they did to me because I had presented each wound in isolation. A borrowed dress, a pregnancy, an annulment, a morality clause, a dismissed photograph. Each one, held up alone, could be laughed off as coincidence or bitterness. I had spent my first life holding up one piece of proof at a time, and they had spent my first life swatting each one away. Yet this time I would not show them one, I would show them 7, I would number them, I would file them, I would let them connect themselves. I got up, I got dressed, I made a list, receipt 1. The small thing everyone would call nothing. 3 days after I woke up, on September 26th, I went to Madame Faye's studio for my supposed final fitting. I had called her that morning. I had asked her in a soft and apologetic voice whether she could make, as a surprise gift for my stepsister, a miniature replica of my wedding dress in a pale pink silk, something small and sweet for her graduation photographs. I offered to pay in advance, in cash, and I asked her to record in her ledger the exact measurements she had already taken for the ivory dress, side by side with Mining's measurements, which I also provided, because I had quietly measured my stepsister's clothing the previous night while she slept. Madame Fay, who had sewn for my family for 20 years, found this charming. She wrote the entries, she dated them, she signed them. She gave me a copy of the ledger page. The ledger page showed that Mining's bust was 2 centimeters larger than mine, her waist 3 centimeters smaller, and her hips nearly identical. The ivory dress, built to my measurements, would fit her only with visible stress at the bust and looseness at the waist. Any photograph of my stepsister in the ivory dress would show, to a trained eye, a dress that had been built for someone else. This was receipt 1, a tailor's ledger page. In my first life, no one had asked Madame Fay anything, because no one had thought the dress was worth asking about. This time, the ledger was dated 6 days before the wedding, signed by a seamstress with a 20-year reputation, and locked in a safe deposit box by the afternoon. It looked like nothing. That was the point. Receipt 2, the thing that proved intent. On the 4th day, I sat down with my phone and began, quietly, to work through Xu Hanzhang's recent calendar. My fiancé was a meticulous man. He kept 2 calendars, a professional one synced to his firm, and a personal one that he believed was private. He had shared the personal calendar with me 6 months earlier, during a gesture of transparency that had embarrassed him so much he had assumed I would never actually look at it. I looked at it now. The 29th of September, the afternoon of the dress, showed a 2-hour block labeled client consultation off-site. Beethoven! I cross-referenced the block with the address of the hotel my stepsister had mentioned casually 2 weeks earlier when describing the neighborhood of her scholarship committee meeting. The hotel was 3 blocks from the client consultation address. I pulled, through a former classmate who worked in hotel management, a booking history search on Xu Hanzhang's personal credit card over the past 18 months. The search returned 14 bookings at that exact hotel, spaced roughly every 3 to 5 weeks, always for the same suite, always in the afternoon. The earliest booking was from the month before Xu Hanzhang and I had become engaged. 14 bookings, 18 months, always the same suite. I printed the booking history, I printed the calendar screenshots, I put them in a second envelope inside the same safe deposit box, and I labeled the envelope in my own handwriting. Receipt 2, intent. The scholarship meeting had never existed. The affair had been older than my engagement. My stepsister had not fallen into an accident on the afternoon of my wedding. She had booked the suite as part of a rotation that predated the engagement ring on my finger. Receipt 3. The person who watched and said nothing. On the 5th day, I invited my mother to tea. I brought her to a quiet place she liked, a small shop near the canal where she had taken me as a child. I let her order, I let her talk about the wedding, I let her describe, with a mother's pride, how beautiful I would look the next week. Then I put a single photograph on the table between us. The photograph was of my mother and my stepsister, taken 8 months earlier at a department store,
and in which my stepsister was holding up, clearly, a child's layette. The photograph was taken by a society columnist I had hired in the Second Life, in the second hour after my return, to pull every archive photograph of my family from the past 2 years. My mother in the photograph was smiling. She was holding a price tag. Her other hand rested on my stepsister's stomach. Mining's stomach in the photograph was flat, but my mother's hand was there, proprietary, warm, the way a hand rests on something expected. My mother, across the tea table, looked at the photograph for a long time. She said carefully, "Wenshu, what is this supposed to mean?" I said, "Mama, when did Meining tell you she was pregnant?" My mother's face did not move, but her hand on the teacup went very still. I said, "I am not angry, Mama. I am only asking." Oh, when? She said at last. She told me in October, shortly after the wedding. I said, Mama, this photograph was taken in January. She said nothing. I did not press her. I did not accuse her. I simply took the photograph back, placed it in my handbag, and changed the subject to the flower arrangements for the ceremony. I asked her opinion on peonies. She gave it, in a voice that was thinner than it had been 5 minutes earlier. Receipt 3 was not the photograph. Receipt 3 was the conversation. I had recorded the conversation. The recording contained my mother confirming that she had known about the pregnancy 8 months before the wedding, 4 months before my stepsister claimed to have discovered it, and 6 months before the child had supposedly been conceived. My mother had not conceived the betrayal.
But she had carried it, quietly, in her hand on my stepsister's stomach for the better part of a year before I walked down an aisle in a dress her other daughter had already worn. I filed receipt 3 in the safe deposit box. I labeled it complicity. Receipt 4. The thing I used to save them in the first life. In my first life, 3 weeks before the wedding, I had discovered by accident that my stepfather had taken out a loan against the Chow apartment building to cover a gambling debt he had hidden from my mother for 11 months. I had paid the loan off myself quietly from my personal account because I could not bear to watch my mother's face if she had learned the truth. I had never told anyone. I had certainly never told him that I knew. In my first life, 3 months after my annulment, he had used the money from the sale of that same apartment building, the building I had saved for him, to buy my stepsister's baby an early education trust fund. In this second life, I did not pay the loan. I went to the bank on the 5th morning and I spoke to the loan officer, whom I had known since I was a teenager. I asked casually whether the loan was still outstanding. He checked. It was. I thanked him. I left. I went to my stepfather's creditor, a man whose name I had learned in my first life from a document I had paid a great deal to recover, and I asked him, in a polite voice, what he planned to do when the loan came due at the end of the month. He said, in an equally polite voice, that he planned to begin foreclosure proceedings on the apartment building. I thanked him. I left. I did nothing. I did not warn my stepfather. I did not warn my mother. I let the disaster move, exactly as it had always intended to move, toward the end of the month. Receipt 4 was not a document. Receipt 4 was my silence, notarized in a way by the fact that I could prove I had known. I kept in the safe deposit box a copy of the loan paperwork, a copy of my stepfather's gambling records pulled through a private investigator, and a dated note in my own hand recording the moment I chose not to intervene. The note was not for a court. It was for me. It was a reminder that in this life, I would no longer be the invisible hand that kept my family solvent. Receipt 4. Refused rescue. Receipt 5. The lie they had already written about me. On the 5th afternoon, I went to Mining's studio at her art school. She was not there. I had timed my visit carefully, and I spoke to her roommate, a girl named Hujai, whom I had known for years and who had always been kinder to me than my stepsister deserved. I asked in a vague and gentle tone whether Mining had seemed stressed recently, whether she had mentioned any tension in the family, whether there was anything I should know about before the wedding. Hujai went pale. She said, after a long silence, that she had something she had wanted to tell me for months. She had, some weeks earlier, overheard Mining and Shu Hanjiang on a phone call in the studio's back room. She had heard them discussing, clearly and coldly, a plan to announce Mining's pregnancy 3 weeks after the wedding, to frame the announcement in a way that would shame me into signing an annulment, and to ensure, in Shu Hanjiang's words, Ed, that the public narrative is set before Wenshu understands what is happening. Hujai had heard Shu Hanjiang specifically suggest the phrase bitter and jealous as the description of me that would be fed to the society columns. She had heard Mining laugh. Hujai had not come to me because she had been afraid. She was a scholarship student at the art school. Mining's family, my mother's family, had influence on the scholarship board. She could not afford to speak without protection. I told her that if she was willing to repeat what she had heard under oath to a lawyer I trusted, I would ensure that her scholarship would be protected for the remainder of her studies through a private grant from my own accounts, funded on the day of her statement. I told her she did not need to decide immediately. She decided immediately. As we went to the lawyer that afternoon, she signed Receipt 5. The script. Shu Hanjiang and my stepsister had not merely planned the affair, they had pre-written the public reputation I would carry after the annulment. They had plotted in advance the words bitter and jealous. A sworn statement from a witness who had heard them plan my character assassination, dated 4 days before the wedding, went into the safe deposit box. Receipt 6. The thing they took because they thought I would stay quiet. On the 6th morning, I went to my mother's study while she was at her weekly salon appointment. I knew the combination to her desk drawer. I had known it since I was 12. I opened the drawer. I pulled from the back a folder I had seen exactly once in my first life, during a conversation in which my mother had told me, laughing, that my stepfather had been so protective lately with all this paperwork about the trust. Inside the folder was the morality clause, the one my stepfather had inserted during the administrative update when I was 19, the one my mother had used in my first life to redirect my inheritance to my stepsister's son. The clause was signed, it was dated, it was notarized, but the notary's seal, upon close examination, did not match any of the 3 notaries my family had historically used. I took a photograph of the seal. I took the folder to my father's original trust attorney, a woman named Mrs. Zhang, who had drafted the trust in the year before my father's death. Mrs. Zhang had retired 6 years earlier. I had located her in this second life through a directory of former bar members. She still had her original records. Essay, she looked at the seal for 4 minutes. She said, "Wenshu, this is not a real seal. This notary retired 9 years before this date. Whoever witnessed this amendment used an expired stamp that should never have been on an active document. The morality clause was forged, not forged in the sense of a fake signature, because my mother had, in fact, signed it. Forged in the sense that the notarization required to make it legally binding had been fabricated by a notary who had not been licensed to witness it. Mrs. Zhang agreed to prepare a formal challenge. I signed it that afternoon. I did not file it. I held it. I kept it ready. Receipt 6. The counterfeit leverage. The clause my family believed would let them take my inheritance after my public shame was, in fact, an empty threat. It had been empty the entire time, in my first life, and I had not known. In this life, I had a notarized expert opinion to prove it, dated 3 days before the wedding. Receipt 7, the one they never knew I had. On the night of September 28th, the night before my stepsister would borrow my dress, I met with a man named Mr. Wei. Mr. Wei was a private investigator who had, in my first life, been hired by a rival of my stepfather's during an unrelated business dispute, and who had, as part of that investigation, installed a discreet camera in the lobby and corridor of the hotel where my fiancé and my stepsister had been meeting for 18 months. Mr. Wei had, in my first life, sold those recordings to the rival and never spoken of them again. In this second life, I had contacted him on my second morning back, offered him a significant fee, and obtained the recordings directly. The recordings showed Shu Hanjiang and Mai Ning entering that suite 14 times over 18 months. They showed them leaving each time together. They showed them kissing in the corridor. They showed, in one recording, Mai Ning carrying a garment bag with the unmistakable silhouette of a wedding dress, dated 3 weeks before our engagement had even been announced publicly. She had been trying on wedding gowns at a boutique, going to the hotel directly after, meeting him there, for months. Before the engagement ring had been purchased, I did not watch all of the recordings. I watched enough. Mr. Wei had, in his professional wisdom, kept time-stamped copies on an encrypted drive, the originals of which had been sent by certified delivery to a legal archive he maintained in a different province. The archive was independent.
Could not be reached by anyone in my family. The recordings could not be destroyed. Receipt 7, 18 months of footage, time-stamped, legally archived, with provenance independent of every person who had ever wronged me. The full picture was now assembled. 7 receipts, 7 drawers. On the afternoon of the 29th, my stepsister came to my room exactly as she had in the first life and asked to borrow my wedding dress. She made her voice small. She mentioned a scholarship meeting. I went to the closet. I took the ivory dress off the hanger. I said, "You should wear it. It will look better on you than on me anyway." She laughed softly, and I watched her laugh with the same calm attention a cat gives to an unlocked birdcage. I helped her into the dress. I fastened the pearl buttons down her back one by one.
I smoothed the embroidery across her shoulders. I kissed the top of her head. I told her she looked radiant. She did. She really did. She left at 4 in the afternoon carrying her handbag, smelling of my mother's perfume. At 4:15, I called Mr. Wei. I asked him to begin recording in real time. He said the cameras had, in fact, been rolling for 6 days, since my second morning back. At 4:45, I called Mrs. Jiang. I told her to file the morality clause challenge first thing the next morning. At 5, I called my lawyer, a woman named Xia Luoxi, who had been preparing the packet for 4 days. I told her the timing was set. At 5:30, I walked into Madame Faye's studio and asked politely if she would be willing to come to my wedding the next day as a personal guest.
Moa, because I wished to honor her 20 years of service to our family. She accepted tearfully. I did not explain. At 6, I went to Hujai's dormitory. I told her tomorrow would be the day. She nodded. She said she would be ready. At 7, I had dinner with my mother. She asked if I had seen Mining. I said she was at her scholarship meeting. My mother smiled. I smiled back. The wedding was scheduled for 11 the next morning. The pattern locked. At 10:30, as the guests were arriving at the venue, my lawyer, Xia Loxi, walked into the wedding suite with a folder under her arm. She did not look at me. She walked straight to Shu Hanjiang, who was adjusting his cufflinks in the mirror, and she said, "Mr. Zhu, a process server will be here in 15 minutes with divorce papers."
Which I understand may surprise you given that you are not yet married. I am here to save us all that step. She opened the folder. Receipt 1, the tailor's ledger on top. Receipt 2, the hotel booking history. Receipt 3, the audio recording of my mother. Receipt 4, the loan documentation and the dated note. Receipt 5, Hujai's sworn statement. Receipt 6, the notary forgery report. Receipt 7, 3 still frames from the hotel corridor footage with the USB drive containing the full archive placed on top of the stack. Shu Hanjiang looked at the folder. Then he looked at me, standing in the doorway in my own silk robe, because I was not yet in a wedding dress, because I no longer owned one. His mouth opened, no sound came out. The pattern locked because receipt 1, the ledger, proved the dress did not fit her. Receipt 2, the calendar, proved he had booked the suite. Receipt 3, my mother proved the family knew. Receipt 4, the loan, proved my stepfather had been insolvent and motivated. Receipt 5, Hujai proved they had pre-scripted my public disgrace. Receipt 6, the morality clause forgery, proved they had planned to steal my inheritance. Receipt 7, the footage, proved 18 months. Each receipt alone could have been denied. Together, they made denial impossible. The room turned faster than I had imagined it would. My mother arrived in the wedding suite 5 minutes later. Xia Loxi handed her the audio recording. She listened for 40 seconds. Her face did not move, but her legs did. She sat down on the small velvet bench by the window. She did not look at me. She did not look at anyone. My stepfather arrived.
Xia Loxi handed him the loan documentation, the gambling records, and the notary forgery report. He looked at the notary seal for a long time. He said quietly to the room, "I need to make a phone call." Xia Loxi said, "Mr. Chow, you may make any phone call you like, but you should be aware that the creditor you intend to contact was served a copy of the foreclosure notice this morning, and that Mrs. Zhang has already filed the notary challenge with the Bar Association." He did not make the phone call. My stepsister arrived last, in my dress. She came through the door laughing, with Shu Hanzhang's hand on her lower back, because she had not yet understood that the wedding was not happening. When she saw the folder, when she saw my lawyer, when she saw my mother sitting on the bench with her face turned to the window.
The laughter died in her throat. She looked at me. She said, "Wen Shu, what is this?" I said, "Like mining, receipts." The collapse was not loud. It was worse than loud. It was administrative. My lawyer explained calmly that the wedding was canceled. She explained that the annulment would proceed immediately on the grounds of fraud, with Shu Hanzhang as the named party. She explained that a civil suit for defamation, based on the pre-scripted narrative Hu Jiayi had recorded, would be filed within the week. She explained that the morality clause challenge had been filed that morning and was expected to succeed, which meant that my trust could not be moved, which meant that the entire structure my family had built around redirecting my inheritance was gone. As she explained that the gambling debt and the notary fraud had been referred to the relevant authorities and that my stepfather should expect a visit within 72 hours. She explained that the hotel recordings had been archived in a jurisdiction outside the family's reach. Shu Hanzhang lost his law license 6 weeks later following a bar review that used Receipt 5 and Receipt 7 as exhibits. His family, deeply embarrassed, disinherited him quietly. He did not marry mining, he did not marry anyone. He moved to a smaller city and took a position as a paralegal at a firm that did not check references carefully. My stepsister lost a baby she had not yet conceived in this second life, because she had not yet had the chance. She lost her art school scholarship, because Hu Jiayi's statement triggered a review of the scholarship board's prior partiality. She lost the inheritance she had been promised because the morality clause was void. She moved back to my stepfather's home province within the year, which was no longer my stepfather's home because the apartment building had been foreclosed. She worked, the last I heard, as a receptionist at a small interior design firm. And she wrote me 3 letters over the following 2 years, none of which I opened. My stepfather lost the apartment building, lost his license to serve as a fiduciary, and lost his place in the family because my mother, in a decision I had not predicted, filed for divorce from him within a month of the failed wedding. She did not do it for me. She did it, I believe, because she could not bear to look at his face across a breakfast table every morning for the rest of her life and know that her other daughter's life had collapsed because of a notary seal. My mother lost me. And not because I cut her off dramatically, but because I stopped pretending. I did not shout. I did not accuse. I simply stopped calling, stopped visiting, stopped answering. She wrote me, 6 months after the wedding, a long letter about how she had failed me. I read it twice. I did not reply. I did not need to. Some silences are the only honest answer to some questions. My exit. I did not stay in the city where my family lived. I did not need to. My father's trust, now fully secured, provided for a life I could build anywhere. I moved to a small coastal town, 3 provinces south, where the Chao name meant nothing, and I opened a small textile design studio in the old quarter, specializing in restoration of antique embroidery. I hired Madame Fei as my master craftswoman. She cried when I offered her the position. Essa, she said it was the first time in her life she had been asked to do something for herself. I never remarried. I never felt the need. I live alone in a narrow house with white walls and a garden I tend myself. The safe deposit box with the 7 receipts is still open in a bank in the old city because Xia Luoxi advised me to keep it active for 7 years. I do not visit it. I do not think about it often. It is there, the way a door is there, the way a lock is there, the way a loaded question is there, when you have stopped being asked it. Once, about a year after I moved, I received a package in the mail. It was my wedding dress. It had been returned to me by Shu Hanzhang's lawyer as part of a property settlement I had not bothered to follow. I opened the box. The dress was still beautiful. The pomegranate branches were still perfect. My grandmother's embroidery pattern still glowed in the afternoon light. I did not wear it. I did not want to. I donated it to the local historical society, where it hangs now, in a small museum of regional textile heritage labeled with my grandmother's name. Not mine. I think about the first Chao Wen-shu sometimes, the one who died in the rental apartment with the peeling wallpaper, trying to make one person believe her. I think about how heavy a single piece of proof feels when you are holding it alone. I think about how light 7 feel when you know they belong together. I am not angry anymore. Anger is a thing you feel when you are still trying to be heard. I was heard in the end, not by the people I loved, but by the rooms that mattered. That was enough. The dress is in a museum. The house is mine. The name is mine. Yeah, the story is mine. They spent my whole first life teaching me that no single piece of proof was ever enough. And they never once considered what would happen the day I learned to count to 7.